Welcome to episode 27 of the Machine Ethics Podcast. This month I'm talking to Dan Faggella about everything AI, from machine technology transition and post-humans, discussing AI and policymakers, where the money's made in AI, and AI ethics as a farce. You can find us at machine-ethics.net or on patreon.com/machineethics. Just a quick note to apologise for some audio glitches to do with the internet speeds, and also that there are some gaps in the audio recording where there may have been swearing. Stay tuned for more of me at the end of the podcast and enjoy. So, hi Dan, thanks for joining me on the podcast. If you could quickly introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure, Ben. Happy to do so. My name is Dan Faggella. I run Emerj. So Emerj is the name of the company. We're basically a market research and advisory firm in the space of artificial intelligence. So we work with business and government leaders who are normally making very expensive decisions about where to go with AI. And kind of our job is to cover the possibility space across different segments and let people know what applications might actually help them achieve their goals. So we work with the World Bank, we work with global pharma companies and even smaller firms on those kind of decisions, and that's my full-time job.
Great. So that sounds like obviously right up our street on the podcast, and we're going to dive into some of that stuff in a little while. But obviously we have to start with, what is AI?
Yeah, man. So really broad, and you mentioned before we were rolling here that you ask everybody this question. We think that the same approach is pretty useful. So we have a piece on emerj.com called what is artificial intelligence, an informed definition or something, where we talk to like 5 PhDs. And just like you said, you talk to people that have excellent degrees in this space from Brown and from MIT, and you're still going to get a different way of saying it. So, I like the really broad definition, which is tough because it's the one that is ephemeral. In other words, it's always disappearing and reappearing in new places. You can't really grab it. But machines sort of doing that category of things that we would have presumed required specific human traits. And so back in the day, this might have been expert system stuff that everybody laughs at now, and it's not even AI anymore, and nobody cares anymore. And now it's all this machine learning stuff, and some of that at some point is going to be old hat, and we're going to laugh at it, and any middle schooler could do it, and who cares about that? And then it's going to evaporate again. So I think that unfortunately, it's a moving target, but that's still the one that I like to use as a broad reference.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a moving goalpost of things that are changing, but it's the thought process is that if you thought about humans touching those things, but they're now being done by like machines, algorithms, then that's the sort of area we're talking about. Right?
Yeah.
We were talking about this briefly before. So you've been called into some of these conversations with governments at the moment, and
Yep.
you're flying out to Shanghai tomorrow. So I was just wondering if you could, what are the things that you can share with us within those conversations?
Just about sort of maybe why AI is relevant at this point. Is that maybe a good place? Like, why is it on their radar enough to get me on the phone?
Yeah, exactly.
In the conversations around kind of the social ramifications of AI, generally speaking, these tend to be policymaker discussions. A lot of the time there's academic folks that are part of these discussions. Mm-hmm. Right now, a good deal of what's going on with like AI's ramifications is still a little bit hypothetical, obviously. And 5-6 years ago when I first got into this space, it was entirely hypothetical. There were like 2 websites that cared about it, and like nobody even knows about them anymore, like Lifeboat and like Ben Goertzel's blog and like the IWT and like barely anybody even cares now. We think it's on the radar, right? It's enough where guys like you have a podcast and it's kind of getting popular. But the part of the conversation that's often not there, I think, right now, is a finger on the pulse of what's happening with AI. So all of my like TED Talks and kind of non-paid engagements are always about the ethical side of AI, because that's ultimately what I care about. Ultimately, I care about the post-human transition. And I think that within our lifetime, there's maybe 60-70% chance likelihood of that occurring, and that there's sort of nothing more ethically relevant from a utilitarian perspective. So I got the ethical focus, but ultimately all day long, we'll look at pharma, banking, utilities, oil and gas, transportation, et cetera, and look at not only what's possible, but what's working. So in other words, not just the press release of like, hey, there's a test, somebody at Duke University did this, and that might mean this, but what's actually being applied in a way where it's delivering a return, where it's delivering a result in the real world. And so having the possibility space and the space of current functioning is our entire job. That's 90 hours of my week. And so that conversation about like, okay, these are the hypotheticals, this is how things could roll out, but which are the things that are maybe priority, that kind of requires a schmo like myself to come in and do it. And so fortunately, on our newsletter, we've got, the head of disarmament in Geneva for the UN. We've got, folks at the World Bank. We've got, a ton of other folks in the policy side of things, in addition to business leaders. And when they need to make a call, they kind of already know a guy because they're listening to my podcast and they're subscribed to the newsletter, and they know that the possibility space is what we do. So broadly, why we're relevant is because policy needs to be bounded within what the hell we should care about first.
So what you're talking about is the real world, essentially, like what is happening right now. What can we take away from this? What works, what doesn't work, and helping people make those decisions about the use of this technology. And how does that play out? I mean, what kind of topics are they going to be relating this stuff to within the governments, within those conversations?
Yep. So I guess it's different in different events, but I can talk to you, I guess, on just a high level about the ones that at least I've been lucky enough to be called in for. So right now, just as a baseline bit of knowledge, if we take where your average business leader is in terms of AI understanding, it's decent. It's way better than it was 3 years ago, where it was like functionally non-existent. It's actually pretty robust, especially in spaces like, let's say, retail, or some corners of life sciences and a lot of areas of financial services, and the big $trillion sectors that we focus a lot of our attention on. People are aware of the concepts. They understand the value of data. They understand roughly the challenges of like that it is a problem that their data is siloed. They understand maybe some degree of the subset of problems that AI could solve. If we go to where policymakers are, we are at a much lower level. We are where business leaders might have been 4 years ago, which is functionally like it was getting on their Twitter stream, but it was almost not anywhere farther than that. Now, I do want to be clear. I don't see that as a sign that policymakers are like bad or behind the eight ball or like it's wrong. I'm just saying the necessity hasn't hit them as soon. So if you are in, financial services and you could save, tens of millions of dollars with anti-money laundering technology, that has to be on your radar as soon as it's relevant, right? But like the social implications of AI is a little stretchier and weirder and farther out and distant. And so maybe that just didn't get on your radar yet. And so we're kind of seeing the beginnings of the up-ramp in the policy world in terms of an AI grasp. And so a lot of what's spoken about, Ben, as much as I wish I could tell you it's the same level of depth as, when I get paid by a room full of pharma execs, it's kind of, can AI help with this? Is AI a thing that could do this? Is this something I should worry about? And it's a lot of ground level knowledge around the broad set of problems and problem types that AI could even be applied to. So a lot of the Q&A, whether it's a delegate from Portugal or Pakistan, or whether it's a policymaker who's in Switzerland, it's kind of that category of stuff at present. And so this is my sense from my experience on the public side for the last, let's say, 6 months or so.
Yeah. So it's almost, do you think they are in a position where because if they're having to get this foundational knowledge, are you seeing them having applications, or is that something that you'll probably see in a couple of years' time? You get pulled back into maybe these conversations, and there'll be some sort of result that comes out of this. That'll be a really interesting conversation to have, I can imagine.
Yeah. Yes. I think so. So you're on point there. So here's how I see it going down. But I do think there's a lot of challenges in the public sector, and I'm not a pessimist by any means. Otherwise, I probably just wouldn't be involved. But there's a lot of challenges. So yes, right now we are in the idea mode. Now I'll be clear. I have a saying that I say all the time that right now, I'm talking, the end of 2018, most of the money in AI is made at events. I still say that because these venture firms all we do is look at companies. That's all we do. We just examine companies, we examine case studies, we grill them. Again, we go to the Facebook offices and we go to the startup offices, and we're building these maps, and we're building these maps for big companies. So I can tell you, these guys are all living off of venture money. They're all living off of venture money. Very few of them are driving powerful and consistent revenues by delivering a result. They're not there yet, right? A lot of these companies, even if they've raised $70 million, they're still like, their whole product set and marketing may be like 2/3 of it may be different 4 months from now, because they're still feeling out how this stuff is supposed to click in the big clunky world of the enterprise. It's hard. They're still figuring it out. And so the money is not, oh, well, there's all these solutions that clearly drive value and they're easy to integrate and the money's getting made. Hell no, Ben. Hell no. Anybody who's tuned in and thinks that is like really deceived. The money is made with people charging $2,000 for events. And a lot of it is event companies that have run an event in pharma or insurance or whatever for 20 years, and they put an AI sticker in front of the event. They bring in AI speakers, and now you can charge $700 more per ticket, and you can get more people to show up. That's where the money is right now. And so, we talk about, you were just saying, is the government like, are they eventually going to buy this stuff and adapt this stuff? Yes. But even in the enterprise world, for the most part, it is fulfilling curiosity. So here's I'm going to explain the paradigm of learning that will have to happen before adoption occurs. So here's how I think about it. Two things broadly that have to be the case, Ben. And this train is moving much faster in enterprise than the public sector, but hopefully the public sector will get where they need to when they need to. And I'm not going to rush them. But one, people need to grasp, broadly speaking, what is the set of things that AI can do? So roughly, what are the requirements? We need some kind of inputs. We need some kind of algorithms. We need to do some kind of work with those algorithms. And there's a certain kinds of outputs that we might be able to put in. So what can we do with image data? What can we do with text data? What can we do to discover things within unlabeled information? So they need to understand broadly the set of problems that AI can solve. And we have like 7 articles that can get somebody up to speed on that, like pretty fast. And oftentimes...
And what's the
go ahead.
What's the URL for that? Emerj.
Yeah, I'll actually it's a Google Doc
right?
for my writers.
Yeah.
It's a Google Doc for my writers, but I'll literally send it to you if you want. Like we can show notes that thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the audience can get the same thing we use to train our writers and researchers.
Awesome.
So, and I recently sent the same doc to National Defense University in Washington, D.C. because the generals and colonels that I spoke for, like high-level military people, also want to know the broad capability space. They don't want to read every blog post on
exactly.
I don't know.
There's only so much time,
MIT
right?
Tech Review or something.
Yeah.
So understanding the broad capability space is, I think, step one, and that is a less than a half-day endeavor. I wish I could tell you it's a half-hour endeavor. It's not, but it's less than a half-day endeavor. Took us a while to boil this stuff down, but we've had to train a lot of folks to write about these things. Yep. So that's pretty simple. The second thing actually takes a bit longer, Ben, and that is to grasp a bunch of currently rolling case studies in the real world within your domain of focus. So when I was speaking to, again, generals and colonels, that might be looking at unmanned aerial vehicle use cases, looking at tank use cases, looking at surveillance use cases, looking at, and being able to drink in. So taking those broad concepts, explaining like, okay, what problems can AI solve? Understand your inputs, what algorithms do, what are the outputs that are reasonable, what do humans have to do to be involved? Taking that concept and then saying, here's an example, fit it through that conceptual framework. Here's another example. It's real. It's not hypothetical. Fit it through that conceptual framework. Do that with half a dozen of those. And now all of a sudden you look into the world and you can say with some degree of confidence, like let's say 8 times better than you were before, that's a problem I bet you AI can help me solve.
Yeah.
That's a problem I bet you AI cannot help me solve. And enterprise and government both need to get to that level where they know where it's relevant. Right now, Ben, they don't know where it's relevant, in part because the tech is so darn new and it hasn't proven itself in a lot of spaces, and in part because people are just tuning into it and they're spending their money going to $2,000 events to learn about it. So, or to pay for our market research, for example. So we're kind of benefiting from this curiosity phase for sure.
Yeah.
So that's what's going to happen in the public sector too, Ben. But I will tell you, it's a slow-moving wheel. We're definitely not at the basic conceptual understanding in the public sector now. Will they eventually adopt AI? Yes, there's a lot of challenges in the public sector to doing so, and I can talk about those if you'd like.
I had a question that came into my mind. So is there, are you talking to people? Because obviously this is the Machine Ethics podcast, and we like
Yes,
to.
yes.
So we have. I appreciate that our audience have a base understanding of what AI means to them, and what kinds of things we talk about in the podcast, from ethical dilemmas to uses of big data and security and all this sort of stuff. But we mostly focus on, given these superpowers, in what places should we use them. So are these the sorts of conversations that are happening at that level, do you think? If we could use this tool for this particular area, but should we think about this? Should we let a human do it, or should we not do it at all? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I have an exceedingly jaded and cynical conception of kind of the AI ethics world writ large right now. But yes, those conversations are making their way in there.
Yeah.
Here's kind of how AI ethics works right now. So if you lead an organization that has to do things, so like a super grown-up, like you're just a grown-up, then you have a lot of concerns, and like the ethical concerns are among them, but you have a lot of concerns. But the way that you will sort of like fulfill your needs and your obligations to, let's say, make payroll, which, by the way, Ben, I mean, let's be cold about it. That's a virtue, man. Making payroll is a pinnacle virtue. Dudes like you can't pay for internet, right? My employees in the other office don't show up. It's man. Ooh, the world goes round, pal. The world goes MFing around. And so making payroll is a paramount frickin' moral pinnacle virtue. And so you got to be concerned with some of those things. But if you have but if you don't have those concerns, then the way that you would gain prominence and the way that you would appear good would be through other means. And so you would obtain whatever that kind of fulfillment is through potentially the touting of more abstract virtues. In the scholarly and Confucian sense. The way that you would obtain prominence, the way that you would obtain notoriety, the way that you would build maybe a name for yourself, maybe wouldn't be through power in the colloquial sense, but maybe you could be better in some moral way than other folks. And maybe get attention in that sense. Now, am I saying that everybody's bad? Oh, the business people just care about business. And the ethics people just... No, I'm not saying people are bad. I'm saying people are people. And so I think that there is a big emphasis right now from the nonprofit and from the academic world that, if only these people running governments and businesses were moral like we are, if only they were moral as we are. And for me, that's a very revolting notion. I consider that to be sort of... Yeah, that's like that notion just like smells bad to me. I just and so that's kind of the state of AI ethics. So a lot of the impetus, whether we're talking about conversations and even in the UN or whatever, a lot of the purely like, hey guys, we need to be ethical and moral is sort of like is essentially the stance is there's these people that lead organizations and they're not good like we are. They don't have morals like we do. And in reality, I think everybody's vying for prominence in the way that they're in the way that they can. And so the powerful and the powerless will do that in different ways.
Yeah, I think we might have supremely differing ideas on that one, but I won't turn this into a big challenge. So do you think there's an incompatibility then? So you're alluding to the fact that the private sector has to make money. It's what private sector does. That's kind of the point. It has to support families, and that's the sort of remit that it has. And by doing that, it supports itself and provides goods and services. Do you think there's an incompatibility there between maybe having some reflection on... I don't think, like for me, I wouldn't say that all businesses are doing bad necessarily.
Yeah, me neither.
But automation, so using automation, using some of these AI things, you're kind of offloading some work to a system. And what I would say is, if you don't necessarily do that in a really... I don't know. It's a quite a complex system, So, if the outcomes from that system are going to affect people negatively, then you should be conscious of that effect. Basically, there's lots to talk about in there. But
yes.
So you don't.
You're saying so? So is there maybe a non-fit?
Yes. So is it our business is just basically not thinking about those things in your mind because they have to make payroll, or do you think that that comes into it and that's good, and actually the people, those ethics people, are maybe talking about something else?
I do think on the aggregate it's good. So here's the rest of the conversation.
Okay.
I've made the analogy probably 100 times of the green movement. You know what I mean? Like the environmental stuff.
Yes.
So here's how I think it works. And by the way, like I don't think the we need to make payroll thing is an excuse for everything. Like I really don't. I think that's like, it's like to say like, well, the buck stops there. End of story. No more talking. That's super childish, and I'm not about it.
Okay.
But I also do believe it's exceedingly childish to say, if only you big people were as good as me. So here's the quote, Ben. So this quote, this is a very important quote in my opinion. So I forget where I pulled this from at some point. There's some Bonaparte quote at some point. And Bonaparte's not that good for quoting when it comes to a bunch of stuff, because he's just not good for a bunch of things. But for like dynamics of power, I think he's among the pivotal sources. And so there's a statement of those who rail against tyranny are many who long to be tyrants. And I think that if the statement of I'm the little guy, if only you people were as good as me, right? How Robespierre is that shit? You know what I'm saying? How straight up Robespierre is that? It's a way to gain prominence when you're a prominent list person. And I'm not saying that AI ethics people are bad, meager little people, nor am I saying the people in businesses are big, fat cat, capitalist, evil people either. I'm just saying these are the dynamics of power. I kind of just feel like I accept that and like get it, but I really don't think that like surely the academics, they go to heaven and the people that run businesses go to hell. Like I think that's like for infants. That's for children. And so I think it's much more gray. Now, you asked if I think there's a compatibility. I do. And I think that even the virtue signaling that is AI ethics today is probably a net good, and here's how. So I liken it to the Green Deal. So the green thing, I don't know when it emerged. It was probably before I was born. But this idea that sort of, hey, we should, care for the environment and not pollute things and the rest of this. Yeah. At some point, this was like a movement, maybe, Silent Spring, I think, was one of the seminal works that kind of got this on the radar, where people, kind of became aware that this was a thing. Probably it was academics and it was scholars and it was maybe nonprofits and people hurling this up into the air and saying, how come these organizations don't care about these things? Then what started happening, as is definitely already happening in AI, is the businesses were saying, they would gulp, we care, and it's kind of forced and it's kind of weird and it's kind of like, I guess they have to care, right? Because like, so let me ask you a question, Ben. How Christian do you think Constantine was?
I don't really know.
Tough historical question. All right, so I'll lay it on you.
It's not in my.
So under Constantine, Rome is like my whole bag. Like I think you just like read enough Rome and like you just understand other things. It's probably probably a bad thought. Maybe I should read other stuff. I read a lot of stuff, but hang there a lot.
Yeah.
So at some point you're ruling Rome, and at some point they're all praying to this guy that died on a cross. By the way, I'm not like making fun of Christianity at all. I'm it just is what it is, right? There were other religions before it. Okay?
It's in the book, right? That's part of the deal.
It's in the book, man. Yeah. That's how he died, man. That's the deal. Like so I have really tight pals who are Christian and the rest of that. And so you're ruling a country as an emperor in some degree, and everybody is Christian. What do you do? I mean, like really, what do you do? So you got two choices. You continue to try to subjugate them like they did in like old Rome, where like they put them in with the gladiators and like have the lions eat them and stuff.
Yeah.
But like that's when there was a fistful of them, and you could like find those little fistfuls and you could throw them in there and you could like have the lions eat them. Now that's morally horrendous behavior, absolutely abysmal, terrible things that fortunately I think for the most part we've moved beyond as a species. But that's the kind of thing that happened to these poor persecuted people. Now at some point there are more of those persecuted than there are of your Zeus lovers, and they're more organized and they're more devout and they're more uniform. And so you have two choices. You either you either try to squelch them all, which would be very tough. You'd have to like kill half your population or something, or like I don't know, find some way to maintain control over them. But they're like really devout, and it's a singular God. It's like not like this constellation of gods like it was back in the day. It's not like India is now, for example. It's like really, God, they got like one thing. And you can do that, or you can say, I too believe in your God, and in fact, I am the voice of your God on earth. And so like I am the channel through which the power of the God that you worship makes his way into the world. So this is choice 2, Ben. And you can understand why choice 2 is preferable to choice 1. Do you understand where I'm going?
Yeah.
So when the green thing gets to threshold X, okay, then it behooves you to not put them in the gladiator ring. You understand?
Yeah.
So it behooves you to instead take up the scepter. And so you see the firms in Silicon Valley being, you can't, by the way, I'm like super politically unaffiliated. I just absolutely can't even think about the idea of being politically affiliated one way or another. I live in like mega progressive cities, and like, that's where I like to live, but I'm still like politically unaffiliated. But if you're in Silicon Valley and you're a company, you obviously have to be hyper progressive, right? You have to be hyper progressive. Like, you got to get your rainbow flags have to be pounding out there when it's that month or whatever. Like, right. You got to have those bad boys flapping, and that has to be way higher than the American flag, because the American flag is like a nationalist symbol, you know. And then that's for bad people. That's for bad, that's for bad people. Ben. So you can only be those kind of things because the world has changed to such a degree where you can't stem the tide. You understand? So with green, at some point you couldn't stem the tide, and people stepped into it because this is the paradigm. I'm going to lose or I'm going to own the paradigm. And so you step in to own the paradigm. Now, to consider this to be based entirely on virtue, Ben, I think is for children. I think it is children who think that, Ben. It's infants. It's not primarily virtue. It is an adapting to the swelling, changing expectations. To presume that Twitter is somehow more virtuous than some, graphic design firm in Iowa is like absolutely childish thought. So here's the deal, though, Ben. Green is now a real deal, and even the people leading bigger companies understand it to be a norm, because you know what? It trickled up from being an academic thing to being a thing that people knew they kind of had to feel, to a generation or two later being a thing that we're kind of proud of, and we all get that as citizens, this is what we now stand for. And you know what, Ben? It might start as non-virtue and it might adapt as non-virtue, but it becomes something that aggregately becomes part of society, and I think it makes us adapt to a world that maybe is aggregately better. So I don't think it has to be angels waking up other angels. I think it has to be these social forces that have some seed of core good. And I believe that in AI ethics, the same will occur. Right now, everybody, I think, is farsing it like they were with green. And at some point, a couple CEOs from now in a lot of these companies, that will be seen as a point of pride and something that they've never questioned. And I think that, Ben, on the aggregate, that will be a good. But I do not think that it is there. I don't think that is the clarion call of the angels waking up the virtue from inside these vicious, evil people that exist today. I think it's just the same brutal, self-interested forces.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because it's almost putting a label on something which is, like you say, like a movement, as opposed to some sort of factual thing. In your Constance, is it Constantine? Constance?
Yeah, Constantine. Yep.
Constantine. Example. He's talking about let's say a non-physical, cultural response. What he had a choice to make there. Well, it's definitely non-physical. You could say it's historical, perhaps, if you believe in it. That's fine. But when we're talking about the environmental movement, maybe we'd say that there are physicalities of that movement, and
for sure,
and I'm obviously very keen to say that I want to do more there. But we're talking about AI right now, so I won't dive into that. Because when I talk about AI ethics, I think you are right. There are some people who are touting, like hitting a drum for people who are businesses are bad and we should be doing better. I think there are those conversations happening, but because I have this podcast and speak to lots of interesting people, I have this kind of view that I don't like talking about AI ethics, but I like to talk about all the different aspects of using AI and these, like you say, like a lot of these are business decisions, right? The business decisions, they're decisions in your design, like you design a service or product, and And in my mind, when we're talking about AI ethics, what we're actually talking about is like designing something well. Are we going to design something well so that it doesn't, necessarily snoop on people or take away some sort of autonomy because, and it could, and that is part of how we design stuff, not just AI, but, it becomes, in my mind, I'm attracted to that AI bit because you could just click go and then be part of everyone's app or 2 million people's phones and all that sort of stuff. So it's kind of like a different degree of... I'm trying to find the words here, but you can see where I'm kind of alluding.
I can. Well, and I think we're very much of the same ilk here. So, apparently we might have some differences around the AI ethics stuff, but I would suspect actually where you're headed is where I like to head. So I think that there is a good deal of abstract, as you had said, if only they were as good as me. Why, I am the sage who should lead us. Why, it is I that should have the power, Ben. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like I have a very visceral response to that kind of just ugliness.
Yeah,
I have a very visceral response to that kind of. But I will say, some people talk about where the rubber hits the road, and this is where I love it, right? Where we say, "Hey, here's something we're designing. What should we bear in mind? Mm-hmm. Should we go this road or this road?" Now we're not talking about how illustrious I am or how horrible you are or how good this person is or bad this person is. We're just saying, hey, we're a company, we're a damn society. Which of these two roads do we take building this thing? And now we're talking logistics. We're talking about the society we want to build. We're talking about the pros and cons of different paths. This, to me, is what ethics is. This is where actual progress and norms and standards could be cultivated and developed in a robust way. And you're right, and maybe I'm being too sad when I see the signaling part of it, but there are people who are focused there too, and by golly, that's what I like. So, I do think that there's progress there as well. We can talk about that.
Yeah. Great. I feel like it came round, so I like it.
Yeah.
Nice. So I don't think we kind of mentioned too much about what specific governments and things like that. So you're going to China tomorrow.
Yes.
Are you having these conversations anywhere else in the world? And do they kind of talk to each other? And does that happen? In terms of kind of the confluence of knowledge in the public sector, I do see it as kind of being in pockets. To some degree, so is the enterprise. Although there are big events that'll bring in people from a lot of different enterprises. And so I think there is a lot more connected, both publications on the internet and physical places to meet, where you get a lot of private sector folks coming together from different spaces. I think the aggregate connectivity there is much greater. Where have I spoken? I mean, in the public sector side of things, we did a huge research project for the World Bank, who, again, they needed the cutting edge stuff, yada, yada. Africa, Romania, Thailand, ministers of IT and health, educating these folks on different things. There isn't, I mean, they didn't just come back from some other public sector conference about data science. Like, this stuff is so new. I think it's happening in these little pockets. I think over time, I would hope, and I think a lot of people think it will be an aggregate good, that there will be events where government leaders in health and IT will come together, and it'll be an event for government folks. And there will be an actual budget for that because it's a certain degree of interest, right? I talked about in the private sector world, most of the money in AI is made in events. I still say that. It's been 3 years. It's really been 2 years since everybody's got an AI event. But in the public sector, at some point, there will be budget to have these bigger things where that becomes a real big deal. But I don't think we're there yet. I see it happening in pockets. I see a lot of the what can AI do being the main questions. I see a lot of technical stuff zipping right over people's heads, and it zips over my head too. I'm not a technical guy. And so I see it happening kind of in isolation. But let me know what you want to know about that. Yeah. Do you run any of your own events?
We don't.
You don't.
And to be honest, I've had every business coach I've ever had for this company has said like, oh, well, you could just run events, because our email list is really big, and it's all like, it tends to be manager, SVP, director folks in like sectors that have money. But I really feel like the event business to me, it just feels like such a grind. It feels like such a spin wheel. What I like to do is, like, if I have limited time and resources, I want to research and then pack all that research into somewhere where I can store it, and then I can build on it next year and build on it next year. And then 4 years later, I have this swelling corpus of capability space of AI that I can share, and nobody else like will know that much stuff, and I can actually maybe have some value, as opposed to 4 years later, have a bunch of events and I might have YouTube videos of them, but there's no core corpus. So I'm really kind of planning on continuing to build in defense, life sciences, and finance these core corpuses of insight. And so that's why I've chosen not to do events. Yeah. So maybe in the future, Ben, but right now, like, I keep thinking it's just such a headache. I'm like, oh, I love research so much more.
Yeah. You almost need to spin off a different, like a subsidiary.
I know. Yeah. It's like, and then someone's got to run that. And then it's like,
exactly. They'll run that. That's fine. You don't have to, don't worry about it. That's how it works. One day. I run very, very small events here in Bristol, and it's still difficult, still very, very tiring.
Yeah, even for a little event, right? It's like there's so many things to do. So I sympathize with you, because we promote a lot of these events, right? We sell, I don't know, hundreds of tickets per month for events in these major sectors for these, O'Reilly Media and the people that run the big events in AI.
Yeah.
And these people are not sleeping like the 2 months before these events. You know what I mean? These like marketing people, like, oh my God, I just keep thinking, like, I already don't sleep. I don't want to live that life anymore. Like, I'll let you guys run them and, pay me to promote them, and that'll be my involvement. So I sympathize with your position there.
So if anyone wants to look you up, as I did earlier, they'll find your TED Talk, which is awesome. So you talk about, stop me if I'm wrong, kind of like how machines can help us maybe get to this better place, inverted commas here, like, and you talk about, what better means to you, and how we kind of have to think about, better for whom as one of your leading lines, and then and how we function as, kind of humanoid beings on this planet, animals, and how that works, and how these machines are different, but they can kind of help us out, essentially, or inform us in different ways. What's this better place that we're going to build, do you think?
Yep. So ultimately for me, I think part of my admittedly maybe too much cynicism on AI and ethics sometimes is because for me, it is all essentially irrelevant until we get to the grand trajectory of intelligence and sentience. So I'm of the belief that at some point there will be birthed whatever is after people, and that the birth and the trajectory of whatever that is, so that things are morally worthy in so much as they are self-aware. If you right now dropped your laptop and it shattered, that sucks, because you have to go pay for it, and like somebody worked hard to build it and stuff. But by itself, like, you won't get arrested for it. Like if you drop your laptop and it shatters. But if you do that with a dog and like it dies or is injured really bad, like you could get fined. And then if you do that with like a child or something, then you could like go to jail for a really long time. And so the more sentient something is, the more moral worth it is. Our laws even reflect that, and I think it's iron truth. As we create whatever is, let's say, 10 or 30 times above our own level of sentience and intelligence, which I would say in the next 70 years, I would give us actually a reasonable chance of doing that. I have like a 60-70% chance that the post-human trajectory will go down within my lifetime. Now, I could be wrong about that, but we've done a lot of polling of PhDs. I don't know, many PhDs in this space. And Bostrom's done his own research in this space. And I respect a lot of the guys in the UK that think about these things. And I give them all the credit that they're due. But I think there's a good shot. And so for me, everything AI ethics, like, yes, I think we got to handle the home front. But at the end of the day, what is the North Star? Where are we ultimately headed to? Is it a world where there's smartphones, but our data's private and we're happy because we have happiness apps? Or is it a world where we are cognitively enhanced to be existing in expansive, blissful universes of our own, where we can't even hurt other physical people or ourselves, and we can live for 400 years like that? And now that sounds super absurd, and it sounds like really sad, like, oh my God, I love my family and stuff. But like, I really don't know how absurd that is. I'm going to be honest with you. I really don't know how absurd that is. I really don't know how absurd mind uploading is. I really don't know how absurd the idea that, so monkeys, whatever, 3-7% genetic difference, chimpanzees and human beings, we go up another 3 or 7%. We're talking about peeling bananas and eating ants with a stick to internet, space travel, etc., right? With that genetic difference, we go up that one more time. How much more morally worthy is one of those entities than a person? How many chimps would you run over with a bus than people if you go in the trolley problem thing, right? How many? Probably, I would guess it'd be like upwards of a dozen. before you would kill a person. So is that going to work the same with people? Or do people have some eternal specialness? To me, this is the ultimate AI ethics question. And I honestly have a hard time even paying attention to other things. I think if it's not about the post-human trajectory, I literally can't even bring myself to care. Now that's sick. That's not right. I'm obviously a little bit overly concerned with the grand shebang, but I was born to die. I'm coping with my existential condition by figuring out maybe the way out of it. And I think that that whatever we shoot for beyond us is so much more has so much more gravity in terms of its moral output than making us little human nodes a little happier. What about expanding the grand node of sentience universe-wide? Isn't that the only grand poobah of ethics that maybe we should hone in on? I don't think we should ignore the near term. I don't think privacy is nominal, but I do think it's nominal in comparison. Maybe we need it to get there, but if we're not thinking about the North Star, what are we doing? So yes, that's kind of the point of the talk, is can AI help us towards that North Star? Or is AI what should benefit from the trajectory itself? Do we think that in 1 billion years, the special humans should be the ones who garner all the benefit? Or when there's something vastly beyond us, as we are vastly beyond crickets, it should rightfully go where it should rightfully go? People don't talk about this, but it's literally the only thing I care about. Yeah. Now, you might be like, oh, surely, Dan, you care about other things. Actually, Ben, I super don't. And so that's the point. Let me know, I guess, where you want to head from there. But that really is what I try to bring up there.
Yeah. So we had a really good. This is not to belittle your argument just then, but we had a really good talk on science fiction, and the one thing I love about science fiction is it has the remit and the special place to be able to talk about some of these things on a grand scale. You know what I mean? So, you know, I think lots of our science fiction writers are actually taking up this case and rolling with it. You know, here's a fun story in a fictional future, which may or may not happen. I'm interested in the dynamics of, you know, all these different things. So I don't know how you feel about that. I feel like on the long term, we're talking about science fiction, but obviously we have Bostrom and people like that who are also talking about it in a very academic sort of setting. But I think it's few and far between, whereas most people are focused on the near future impact-led conversation. Yep.
And I'll be honest, that obviously is where we focus most of the time too, is like, okay, in the big sectors for governments and for businesses, what's happening now, what's happening in the next 5 years. For me, though, like ultimately it's about where it rattles forth to. And I think it's really cool you bring that up with science fiction. I have a really hard time like my introduction to AI ethics was not like, oh, I watched Star Trek and thought it was cool. Like I super don't read fiction. Like I've had to be forced to read the big transhuman fiction stuff like Snow Crash and what's that anime thing? Ghost in the Shell. Like I have like a guy named Wendell Wallach who I really respect, who's like kind of peer pressured me into getting into some fiction. And I have a hard time. I got into AI ethics from Bostrom, Naif al-Rodan, Kurzweil, and then from like Bacon, Emerson, Lucretius, like hardcore MFing philosophy. And like in old and new, that's all of AI ethics for me. I read history, I read philosophy as robustly as I possibly can amidst all the other work that I have. And all of my rattlings forward are from those two. And they have almost no fiction elements. It's just rattling forth the philosophy elements and the history elements. But yes, I do agree with you. I think fiction writers serve a really cool and potentially very powerful role in where we're headed. And I think that I kind of wish I could get more into it, but I definitely respect the heck out of the craft. I respect the craft in a big way, and I think it's important.
Yeah, awesome. I'm an avid science fiction reader, and to be honest, I think I need to do more of what you're doing, really. My history is not so up to scratch, the philosophy stuff, more so, but obviously Rome is not on my agenda at the moment. But
it doesn't have to be, right? Everybody's got their own favorites, right? Greece and Rome, I'm just a sucker, man. I'm just a sucker.
I like the whole republic thing. That's cool. I like that. It's an interesting
me too, man. It was
mechanic idea.
Yep.
So you have this podcast, and you have many episodes. I was looking at it. I'm a subscriber. Do you? What's the podcast about? A quick shout out to the podcast and why people should listen.
Sure. Yeah. If folks are interested more in the practical applications of AI, so the podcast is called AI in industry. And just on emerj.com, we have a little button that says podcast. People can check it out. But essentially, what we started doing, Ben, this is 6 years ago. You can actually listen to the really old episodes. I think the first one, I don't know, iTunes, I think, doesn't store them beyond a certain period. But the first one was like end of 2012. No joke. Right. And we have like Robin Hanson and Stuart Armstrong from Future of Humanity Institute, like these guys. This is like 2012, bro. And it was all AI ethics when we started. It was all grand trajectory AI ethics when we started. But over the last, let's say, 6 years, it's really evolved to be practical. Where is AI hitting the ground running? So if people look in transportation and they say, okay, realistically, where are we going to be in 2 or 3 years? Well, we bring on super high level people from companies at the cutting edge there and make them paint the future picture, the present future picture. We do that in, document and process automation stuff. We do that in research and discovery. We do that in, insurance and in diagnostics for medicine and infectious diseases, and look at the current lay of the land and look at the near future in terms of hard impact in the world. So it's about where is this stuff hitting the ground running and what's the possibility space of AI in terms of practical stuff. And that's, again, what we get called into with the World Bank and the UN to give talks about. That's what the show is about. So AI in industry, if people are into that, they can check it out. Obviously, it used to be way more, I think, up your alley, only, again, focused on the North Star of like what's after people. It was there for like a year and a half and nobody cared. In 2011, exactly 0 humans gave about the post-human trajectory. And so I had to go into the business side of things. But anyway, long story, but that's what we focus on now.
Yeah. I think one of I remember someone who said of my podcast that it was too specific. And then a year later, they said, "Oh, actually, maybe you were onto something." So I love it when you get vindicated, but it's a bit of a shame that obviously
I didn't get vindicated.
So I think it's too soon. Well, not necessarily too soon, but you're talking about something which maybe the majority of people weren't ready to hear yet. Maybe.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think even now, AI ethics has more public attention in the way. I'm sorry, I'm just plugging in my laptop as we're talking because I forget. We go long on these, Ben, but I want to hang here with you. I don't want the comp to die as we chat. But I think in terms of AI ethics, where you are resonating is probably where most of the minds want to tune in, which is kind of, how can we build things that are better? And again, I think that I'm way down with you on that. Like when it's not like observe me and my shining towering virtue as I am Robespierre and the king should fall. Which for me is, I can't fall for that, right? I've read too much history to believe that you're actually a more virtuous person. But when we talk about do we go left or do we go right when it comes to this aspect of privacy, what is the society and business we want to build? I love ethics injecting its way into that convo. And obviously that's where you're focused, and there is an audience for that now. And 6 years ago, Ben, there was nothing there. And so I think it's awesome that your show's been vindicated and that this topic is something people care about. I am happy about that. I really am.
Yeah. And I guess you get to talk about in pockets like the UN and things. Those conversations must come into it, even if not the big base level stuff, but, maybe every now and then.
Nugget. I get to sprinkle it in. I don't get to, when I'm at the UN mic, I probably won't be able to talk about like, and at some point we may have to hand off the reins to the thing that we create. I probably don't get to talk about that.
Sure.
But I do get to talk about little bits, and I think it'll all come in due time. But the practical side, I think, definitely has its place.
So I think so we're hitting near the end. So I have a question which I ask at the end, and that is, Dan, what is it that you're really excited about within this remit of AI and machine automation, and what is it that slightly worries you?
Yeah, I think it's the same. It's one and the same. I think ultimately for me, the thing that I think is exciting, but is definitely worth being afraid of, is what is the trajectory of intelligence and sentience? In other words, what are we teeing up? What are we starting up? We came after other things, and there will be other things that come after us. What is that, and how do we let that into the world? I think is both exciting and fearful. The more near-term dynamic of that, Ben, is that I have a fear that we will not be able to avoid the arms race dynamic of that transition. In other words, there will be so many benefits accrued militarily and economically to the nations and the companies that master these technologies in a big way, that how could we have a open-minded, well-intended, interdisciplinary kind of global convo about, hey, humans, hey, team humans, what are we shooting towards? What's the North Star we're shooting towards? I have a fear, Ben, that the dying words of Alexander will always be true. And it's purported, at least by Plutarch, of whom I loyally read on the regular, that the last words of Alexander were, they asked, to whom will we give the kingdom? They said, to whom will we give the kingdom, my king? And he said, he's purported to have said, to the strongest, and then died. And I fear, Ben, that the powers of AI will just go to the strongest as well.
Yep.
Is that the recipe for catastrophe? I mean, US-China kind of dynamic, or however you want to see it. Is that gruesome state of nature have to be how we make a step forward? Does that have to be what births what's beyond us? I get nervous as hell about that, Ben. Nervous as hell.
Yeah. So good. That's a lovely way to finish with this worrying picture of domination almost.
Yeah, the arms race and the state of nature. Yeah.
Yes,
sure.
exactly. Let's just move past that and say that we're on the other side now, and everything's daisies and buttercups and butterflies and AI, so everything's great, or like sentient whatever that is. Great, awesome. Thanks, Dan. So how can people find you, contact you, all that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. People can, our main site is just emerj.com. So literally more than 90% of we create, I mentioned World Bank and the other people that we do proprietary research for, but more than 90% of what we produce is out there for free. So whether it's credit scoring or biped robots or innovations in life sciences, like we just have a tremendous trove of reports that are up on emerj.com. So that would be the cool place to find us if people are into that side of things and want to know about like the practical today now, when ethics does come up again, it's in the context of decisions made in developing products and in the real world. AI in industry is the name of the podcast, just AI in industry. It's iTunes and all the rest of that stuff. So those would probably be the best ways to find me. If people want to hit me up on Twitter, just at Dan Faggella. Let me know you heard me on Ben's show, and way more than happy to say hi. So that's me.
Thanks very much for talking to us on the podcast. Good luck tomorrow and in the future with all these amazing conversations. You better be telling people the base knowledge, I guess, the right information. So,
Get the foundation stuff. Yep, that's the mission, man. So I'll be on it.
Sweet, cool. Thank you, Dan. Hi, welcome to the end of the podcast. Thanks again to Dan Faggella for joining us. If you'd like to hear more about my thoughts about the conversation, then I'm starting a new video tier on the Patreon at patreon.com/machine ethics, where each month you can hear my thoughts about each month's episode. If you'd like to appear on the Machine Ethics podcast or have any questions for our guests, then please email me at hello@machine-ethics.net and find all our other episodes at machine-ethics.net. Thank you again for listening.